Hey, this is Amy with Creative Catapult Coaching,
And Megan with Focus Like a Mother and Change HP.
and this is the Control My Voice, the Control Alt Think podcast, Conversations with Neurodivergent Minds.
And today we were thinking of talking about how we each prepare for conferences and all the peopling and all of the just
The
outside of the
commitments,
usual
the
routine.
energy drain,
Yeah.
potential, all of the things. I'm actually headed to the CHAD, so the National Conference on ADHD in a couple days, and I had the brilliant thought that I will volunteer on opening day, and then the extra brilliant thought of, oh, then I should take a flight at 8 a.m. because that's not that early. Neglecting to calculate backwards with my own inexperience and time blindness that means that I'm leaving the house at 5 a.m., which I don't do. And, I'm meeting up with people for lunch and then doing a volunteer shift and then attending a networking event with other ADHD coaches. And somehow in my head, this all seemed great. And, I've been upping my exercise and my energy output, and I'm already sitting here going, am I shooting myself in the foot? I haven't even packed yet.
Hmm.
And it'll be fine. But again, it's that experience and how to manage oneself, especially with evolving physical aspects of my life, mainly energy management.
Hmm.
But how do your conference prep go?
So it's been a minute since I've gotten to go to an in-person conference. Um, but and a lot of my in-person conference experience was before I knew anything about neurodivergence. So I just kind of figured it was, just personality trait stuff. And I've also traveled with other people going to work conferences, um, people that are introverts. So just the introvert versus extrovert approach to going to conferences. Um, conferences are a lot of fun for extroverts. I feel like for many introverts, they may be forms of torture, um,
What I love
like
about
weird necessary torture.
um,
But for
sorry.
me, I'm used to traveling. I haven't traveled again in a hot minute, but I used to travel all the time for work. For me, the conference piece was just that it was outside of the usual routines, the usual social expectations, there were a lot of unknowns. I've presented at conferences, I've been on panels at conferences, and I've just been an attendee. Um, and I like to look through the information and kind of plan out like knowing which things I want to go to or what I want to get out of presentations and things. But as a presenter and a panelist, you don't really know what things are going to come up. You have no idea how technology is going to cooperate. Um, you have a backup for your backup for your backup a lot of times. Um, but I just kind of usually go into it with like, what can I control and what is stuff that I just have to try to be prepared for. But I never really realized in the past now what I would recognize as things that I was doing as a neurodivergent person. Like I would always have I can be a social butterfly if I really push myself, like set the goal of I've got to go meet five new people at this conference, whatever. But generally, I have my emotional support human or two that they don't
Uh-huh.
know that they're my emotional support human, but I'll tend to hang around with the
Stay with the
same
same people.
couple people. Or the last big one where I presented and was on a panel, I actually planned to get movement in, which I think helped. So, like, I knew the conference center we were at had a hiking trail, so I went for a trail run um, the days that I was there, and things like that, where I know what I'm going to be doing and I'm doing things for me, or I'm spending time. Um, the last event that I went to, it wasn't a conference, but I spend a lot of time in my hotel room, like
Yeah,
decompressing.
no,
Um, so
that'll
yeah, it's been a while since I've presented or been
done
on a
some
panel, but I've been to
self-care.
events, and it's more the unknown that gets me.
Yeah, well, and one thing that you would probably appreciate, is the planners of this conference actually have 30 minutes in between every session for a break to deal with some of the overwhelming. Most of the folks here are neurodivergent, or at least the vast majority of us. They
That's
also have a quiet room and a fun slash distraction room that should give people a place to go and decompress. And the quiet room, I'm doing some volunteering, not for that, but basically, if people are talking, the monitor is supposed to ask them to head over to the fun fidget room so that the people can actually decompress in silence.
oh
That
nice.
being said, I have to make sure that I've got some ear sleeves that help with sensory stuff for me, the flare audio things I've probably mentioned, I know privately in our conversations at least 500,000 times, but I'm not sure I've ever talked about them on the podcast. They're these sleeves that go in my ears and they change the way the sound hits my eardrum. And so it's actually a lot easier for me to make sense of conversations, especially if I'm tired. Um, they don't cut the sound, they just redirect the sound. Um, so I'll be doing that. And like you said, some self-care. I have been the one before who's been the first person to stand at a conference, stand at the back of a room long before I knew I had ADHD, and doing it unobtrusively in a way that I could still listen, but let me keep my attention and keep my alertness up. So there's, this combination of pre-preparation, I think, as well as in the moment preparation. I've kind of mapped out a schedule for myself for the conference, but my secondary goal, my first generic goal is to get involved in my community and connect with people I haven't talked to in years.
Hmm.
And all the peopling. Secondary is I really need to get some continuing education credits. So it's like hit as many of the sessions as I can that are going to give me CCEs so I can renew. And I've put this off for a while, and now I've got plenty of time. I've got a year, but I need to start putting in some actual intention to getting the hours I need for my continuing education in a way that can be
Yeah.
documented.
So for listeners that we haven't talked about our coaching credentials yet, that's one of our topics eventually we'll get to. But one of the things that ICF certified coaches, credentialed coaches, have to do is every 3 years we have to renew our credentials with ICF, which means we have to log a certain amount of continuing education credits to make sure really this just ensures or promotes the continuing growth and development and education of coaches so that we're staying on top of current research, current coaching best practices, all of those different things.
Well, and staying in touch with the ethics as well, because while technically anyone can call themselves a coach, ICF credentialed coaches and several of the other big coaching organizations and bodies do operate under a code of ethics because it is the Wild West. Before you and I met, you could have called yourself a coach. And a lot of people who I think don't go through the formal credentialing maybe great at listening because it is a specific non-advice giving, non-mentoring, it's a different definition, and understanding that is part of what makes a credentialed coach different than somebody who calls himself a coach, but maybe hasn't made the distinction between a lot of other helping professions, as well as then the goal being to keep people with ill intent. And that sounds very good versus bad. But again, to provide some standards. And so people have some places that they can go if they feel somebody has been unethical or, they've got some recourse. They've got some ability to look and say, this is what this person stands for. And so people have asked me for a lot of years, off and on, why I keep up the ICF certification. And it is for some legitimacy and for some standards that I, find to be important. So I'm going to a conference and I'm going to spend a lot of energy doing that. We can do a whole nother episode on our coach credentialing
Yep. Yep.
pieces
You
of
just mentioned
integrity.
CCEs.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so,
No,
yeah,
I know how we got here,
we
but
both have to continue our education so that we can be the best coaches that we can be in our specific niches for our clients.
yeah. And in a lot of ways, I'd say most coaches are curious. So in theory, this isn't that difficult, but for me, it's the documentation and then actually submitting it. And I love learning. I am less in love with the documentation because it doesn't play to my strengths.
Yeah.
But so this, the beauty of doing something like a conference then is that I can tick off a whole lot of these in one swoop. It will not hit all of them for me, but it's something where I'm interested in getting back connected with the greater world of coaches, especially after the pandemic. And haven't been in this, specific group for a long time. And a lot of us are all over. So it's a kind of a neat chance to reconnect with people that I've done work with online, but maybe haven't met in person or seen in person in 5, 8, 10 years.
Yeah. So it sounds like the conference, and to me, I think it would be a similar perspective. Conferences in general present a trade-off of, there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of things you can't control, there's a lot of energy drain, there's a lot of uh, sensory inputs and a lot of travel, a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, all of that. But the trade-off is you get to learn new things, which you and I, knowing us both, we both really like. We get to reconnect or connect with people who have similar interests to us, and build that network and really just improve ourselves and also share what we've learned with other people. So I think the trade-offs are there. I in my perspective, generally I think they're worth it. Uh, conferences are also expensive, so there's it's the other
Yeah,
downside. Just a lot that goes into it. But I think you and I both have gotten a lot out of conferences in the past.
yeah.
So and
Although
hopefully this time too.
and laughing because I think there have been times that I've bounced between having a roommate and not having a roommate for years. One of my first conferences I went to, I think I was so overwhelmed, not too long after I was diagnosed with ADHD, that I remember, and I was super broke at the time. I was in the middle of job change, profession change. Things were tough. And working with my coach at the time, it became very apparent that if I was doing this again, I needed to have my own room. I think I did for that conference. This year I'm sharing with somebody who is in a occupational therapist field interested with ADHD. So I think that's going to be quite fascinating. I don't know if sharing a room is the right piece, but it was a trade-off I made. And again, this time I actually am realizing I know more people than I expected going as I start reaching out and start hearing about stuff. And it's like, oh, there are people that I know and not just the people from California and the Midwest, but it's like, oh, there are other Seattle-based people I know as well. Oh,
Mm.
that's interesting, and good, but there was a point, I'm not quite sure what it was.
Yeah, just there are different, I heard more trade-offs in there because you mentioned having a roommate, but also realizing that there are more people going that have connections to you than you thought. What are your, I guess I'll do the question first and then the reason for it. What are your thoughts on virtual conferences? And I ask because over the weekend I found a LinkedIn post of one of the podcast hosts and neuroscience researchers that I follow, and she shared a conference that has to do with parent brain research, and it's in Spain next year. So, for our listeners that don't know, I am a mom of two small people who are not yet in school. Um, and then have my husband who works full time. And so it's like, well, I don't think that I'm gonna be going to Spain for a conference, even though it would be super cool and interesting with my work with Focus Like a Mother. But they actually have a virtual option. So what are your thoughts on, I know what some of my thoughts are on virtual conferences, but what are your thoughts on them, Amy?
Virtual conferences are great in theory. I think that, there's going to Spain would be rough. I mean, just from a logistics standpoint and all the things we've already hit on. Um, I think virtual conferences have a lot of potential value, but it's really hard to stay focused. I did a number of them when the pandemic was first rising, and it was always like, oh, I'll try and smush this session in between two other client calls. So it's like I didn't treat it like I was at a conference. I tried to add it into everything else I was already doing. I didn't
Ah,
get a chance to connect with people because I was already spending so much time on Zoom that while they tried to do some virtual mixers, it wasn't the same. Actually, I take that back. I think I did do some connecting with people, but it's a vastly different dynamic. It was probably, in some ways, it was more tiring. I mean, at least I got to sleep in my own bed, but, paying attention to more stuff, especially if the speaker was boring, but I needed this continuing credits,
mm,
had to pay enough attention to be able to answer the exit survey was how they tracked it.
that's
Um,
interesting because I had some of the same thoughts, but there were some things I didn't really think about. Oh, I might not end up treating it like I'm going to a conference and blocking my calendar. Whereas, like, now that you bring that up, I'm like, oh, well, I should totally treat that as like I am doing this conference. The other thing is with this one being in Spain, what's the time difference and when are these
oh,
sessions going to
yeah,
be?
that's gonna be the other. Well, and if you flew, I mean, it would, I think for you, it's, 5 hours, probably time difference, maybe.
Yeah, it would be pretty.
For me,
Yeah, I
it's
think that would be
eight.
it. Yeah, and well, and for me, the big thing that as exhausting as it is, the big benefit for me of conferences is getting to see people face to face
And that's
and
it.
network and interact. Whereas the virtual one, it's like it would be, and it's not as expensive to attend a lot of conferences virtually as it is to go in person because there aren't as many of the benefits. Um,
Well, and you don't need airfare, you don't need a hotel room, you
you're
don't,
not eating.
yeah, I mean, and so it's trade-offs. They
But yeah,
both I think have
I wish
benefit.
I could get the networking out of it. but like for this one, maybe in a future year. Um, but it's like I would love to go to conferences. It just takes a lot. When I worked in the corporate world, I would pick like one or two a year that it's external, like this is a big thing I want to go
Uh-huh.
to. And then I'd have to justify it to be able to fit it in the budget to be able to go. And so I'm trying to figure out how to do the same thing with my own work, kind of like
Well,
you're
what I've
justifying with
done for past
continuing it.
conferences is, you make it a, you tack on a week before or after, or half a week, and, do a vacation. As long as you're going that far, you may as well do something cool with it.
Well, yeah, if I'm gonna go to Spain, I'm not just going for a couple days because by the time I'd adjust to the time, it's like time to turn around, come back. But we are getting close to the end of our time. What other
Right.
thoughts do you have on the topic of conferences before we wrap up?
Um, Weigh your options. There's a lot to be said for connecting in person, but I think do it with some intention and discretion. And same with virtual. What do you want out of it? Why are you doing it?
Yeah, and the other big theme I heard in our whole discussion was planning ahead makes some things a lot easier for us, at least in terms of knowing what to expect, knowing what we need to take, like the flare ear sleeves, making sure that
The
we're
business
planning
part.
self-care.
Where are, yeah, there's so many things I keep thinking. Okay, I've got my rides reserved at this end to get to the airport, but man, where's all the stuff? I haven't
Yeah.
even started packing yet, and it'll be fine.
Well, let's wrap this one up and then you can go get ready to pack.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Well, this is Megan with Focus Like a Mother and Change HP.
And Amy with Creative Catapult Coaching. We'll see you next time.